and we can only think about costs. How precious are our children? Let's not fool around with this. Let's vote no, and let's immediately work to fund nurses at schools, clinics at schools, the best possible care for our children, those that are so precious to us. I ask for a no vote.
Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. I've been waiting 6 months for a bill from my seatmate that I could actually agree on. And lo and behold, here it is. I appreciate the debate, and I know there's two sides to it, but I think we're in broad agreement that we all care about the lives of children, and I feel like this gives emergency life-saving ability to act, and I think that's important. At the same time, yes, we do need to work on the funding and make sure we have nurses in schools and trained medical personnel. But anyway, I rise in support.
Mr. Amiano.
Yes, thank you. I rise in opposition to this, and not with a light heart about it. I taught special ed for many years and had many students who suffered from all kinds of epilepsy and different variations of seizures. I always did want to depend on whoever was the medical practitioner more than even on my own judgment, because sometimes these cases raise anxiety with other students, with indoctrinated staff. There's still a great prejudice that exists towards special education students. Never mind the sophistication of what we're trying to arrive at here in this bill. We do, I think, need to revisit this. I think there is a solution. I really don't feel that this is the way to go when this particular medication is administered. It's a very, very private thing. It's a very intrusive thing. And usually when it's administered in a hospital, there are two people who do that. Also, in this era of layoffs, et cetera, and job security, and let's face it, I've been there for 23 years in public schools. The term voluntary becomes a little iffy. So I would recommend a no vote on this, but I wouldn't want to abandon this issue. And I think that we could come up with something that is suitable.
Mr. Furutani.
Madam Speaker, a question to the author, please.
Without objection.
Mr. Cedillo, how have we been doing this up till now? I mean, nurses have been long gone from our schools. How have we been doing this up till now?
This was actually a practice for the last 10 years. So Mr. Mendoza talked about his time in the classroom. This was, in fact, the practice. A recent ruling changed it and requires us now, as a matter of law, to bring forward this directive or the permission that we seek here. But in fact, this is what we've been doing for 10 years until we had a ruling from, I think it's the nurses, if I may read. It was a common practice until we had the Board of Registered Nursing advise us that we didn't have a provision to permit this. And so what this does now is bring forth the provision to permit it. And so as Mr. Mendoza said, he was in a classroom, but this was what was the practice during that time period until a recent ruling by the Board of Registered Nursing, which advised that there was no provision for the training. And now this law brings that provision forward so that we can make it permissive and return to the practice that existed.
Thank you. On my own time. My staff and myself have been looking at this bill, a very difficult bill. We've been getting contacted by different organizations and individuals relative to pro and con, like we do so much on every bill. And oftentimes, no matter the issue, when we debate something on the floor, a lot of the loudest debate represents the extremes. Either we're going to let our kids die, or we're going to do this, or we're either going to have no interpretation for patients, or every person should have their own interpreter with them at all times. I mean, extremes. I know that when we really get down to it at the end of the day, we're all trying to find a solution. This one's a very critical issue, needless to say, that needs a solution. One reference in the analysis and something we had looked at was that in the past, people, when you say volunteer, I mean, I appreciate mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It's difficult. I've seen it. The issue of external, stand back and they have the electric shock. Have you ever dealt with someone that's having an epilepsy episode? And how you deal with this, administer this shot, it doesn't sound like, I've never had to do it, but it doesn't sound like an easy thing, nor is it located on an easy part of the body to get to.
30 seconds.
So this is very difficult. I don't want to abandon this issue. I think it's got to be trained personnel. It can't be someone, well, okay, I'll try it. I'll volunteer and I'll go take some. It just seems so serious that I think we should work on it more to find a better solution. Can we have a nurse in our classroom, in our schools, like we used to when I was going to school? We know that isn't going to happen. I mean, nurses, what they call them, itinerants now, or they go 1 or 2 days, part of the day in school.
Thank you, Mr. Furtado.
We got to find a better solution. Thank you.
Mr. Fuhrer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The speakers who have risen to say that we need to have nurses in our schools are right. The question that that argument raises is, does supporting this bill in some manner make it less likely that this body will fund nurses in schools? And if it doesn't, what's left? The reason we haven't funded nurses in schools has to do with the intransigence that we see around revenue on this floor and in the floor of the Senate. That intransigence needs to change. And you would think, listening to both sides on this issue, that we could find common ground around assuring that we have adequate money for all facets of public education, and that includes the integrally important presence of nurses on campuses. But having said that, at this moment, we don't have nurses on our school campuses all the time. So what do? I had a long conversation yesterday with a mother of a child for whom this is the most fundamental issue. And I asked a lot of questions about the details here. And here's what I think. If we don't pass this bill, we are saying to the parents of kids who suffer these seizures, there is no safe school for your kid. And I'm somebody who believes we should be finding ways to encourage people to be in public schools. I asked a lot of questions about the method by which this is administered, and it is indeed very sensitive and very complicated. But I have no sense that there is undue pressure placed on anyone in the school setting, be it a volunteer parent or a teacher, to volunteer to do this. The floor manager points out, as others have, that this was the practice for years and years in schools, and I am not aware, perhaps others on this floor are, but I'm not aware of any major problems that occurred as a result of this practice. It is the case, because I talked to this mom at length, that the existence of volunteers who can perform this procedure is not only life-saving, but think what you would feel as a parent if your kid is on a campus and there is no one available to do this. You couldn't have your child go to school anymore. Now, on my own view here, I think that if we allow the availability of volunteers for this purpose to in any manner impede our commitment to getting nurses on campuses, then we are being disingenuous and making a big mistake here. But I'm going to support the bill, because I don't think that's the issue. And again, if you look at a decade's worth of practice with no major problems, As the floor manager mentioned, the only change that's occurred since that practice was in place is a bureaucratic change. A board said you need to have authority to do this. That happened last August, I believe. And so since that time, think what parents are feeling about their kids in this situation, and think about the insecurity of those kids in that situation going to school. What happens if this occurs to me? So notwithstanding the very important arguments that have been made by opponents of this bill, I think through the lens of a parent that the best thing for us to do is to allow a practice that formerly occurred to occur again and create a safe place in public schools for kids who need our focus and care. Urgent aye vote.
Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to support the comments made by Assemblymember Swanson with regard to the values we place on children and families and the values that govern our decisions here in this body. And with permission, requesting permission to read
Without objection.
from a policy committee analysis, I wanted to remind us that in the 9-10 session, there was Assembly Bill 2454 by Torlakson, which would have required the governing board of a school district to employ at least one school nurse, registered nurse, or licensed vocational nurse for every 750 pupils on or after July 1st, 2020. It failed passage in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. So as we talk about an ideal circumstance in which we would all love to have a school nurse, as mother of asthma boy, would love to have a school nurse in every school, this body has, for whatever reason, come to the conclusion that that's not feasible today. Further, with permission to read from the same analysis, to get to support Mr. Fuhr's point, the Disability Rights of California organization contends that SB 161 is an important step to providing children with epilepsy with access to free, appropriate education. The DRC writes access to medication is important for children with disabilities who need it to be able to receive an education in the least restrictive environment with their peers. I support SB 161.
Colonel Cook.
There's been a lot of debate today about this, and this is a very, very difficult bill, I think, for everyone. And I'm speaking as a teacher, but also as somebody that's been in a difficult situation in the past. And I can understand the opposition and the concerns about whether you have the training, whether you have the ability to handle that. And I go back to many years ago, and I won't tell you how old I was, but I don't think I could drink legally. Maybe I was 21. But it was a combat situation where we had our unit that ended up in a minefield. We lost all our corpsmen, the ones that were trained to handle certain situations, with legs blown off, actually intestines hanging out. It was the most horrific experience I ever had. And the situation is analogous to this, where there is a situation that you don't plan for. Now, I had some type of training. I was not a nurse. I was not a corpsman. I was not a doctor. But the situation called for action. You had to do something. People were bleeding to death. You couldn't wait for a half an hour for a medevac helicopter to come in. And I did not want to do it because, I was afraid I was going to do the wrong thing. I might accidentally kill somebody. Although, the situation warranted it, because they probably would have died anyway. But the point here, and I think Ms. Lowenthal emphasized that if you take this voluntary training and you're there in an environment where a situation like this happens, you have to do something. And I think we can argue the pros on this over and over again, but the key part of that if you do have the training, and fortunately I did have a little, and hopefully I did make a difference. But when you are in command of a classroom, just like in command of a certain situation, you have a responsibility to look out for the lives of those individuals under your command, and you have a responsibility to look out for the lives of those children that are in that classroom. I ask you to support this bill.
Mr. Allen.
Madam Speaker, fellow members, this particular bill has been one of the hardest bills for me, as you can imagine. I'm a registered nurse, yet I've spent 30 years as a labor attorney representing the interests of working people. We have working people, the representatives throughout the state, saying, do not do this to us. We do not want to have this particular law or obligation put upon us. I recognize that. I've asked the question of my colleagues, why are we dealing with this one drug at a time? Insulin was discussed another year. It seems like these issues come up, and the overriding issue is really truly taking care of our children. And so as far as public policy goes, we all know that really we need to have nurses and mental health counselors in every school. And I think that many of us would vote for that, work with organized labor, members of the community, parents to make that happen. Speaking as a father of 5 and a grandfather and talking to parents, in good conscience, I cannot say to them that we would not allow this to be in our schools as a voluntary program and to provide the training. But to me, the issue is that if we're voting for this to provide this service to our children, then if we vote yes on this bill, there's an obligation to work with organized labor, parents, and the community to really put quality back in the schools. Because to me, this is a stopgap measure. We're going to be facing other medications in the future, other procedures in the future, and it's a denial of reality to say this issue won't come before us. So we're kind of saying this is just good enough, it's the best we can do. But for myself personally, I think we can do better. So if we do not listen to the representatives of the workforces, for the teachers, the nurses, and all who are saying this is not what should be done, we have to know in our hearts that we can do better. So if we vote for this today, and I would urge an aye vote, it's with the knowledge that we're going to work with the parents and people who care about quality in schools to bring back to the schools what is truly needed, which are nurses and teachers. So I urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to rise. As you all know, I chair the Education Committee, and this bill came before us, and I spent hours and hours and hours and hours analyzing this bill and speaking to the proponents and opponents of this bill, speaking to the author of the bill. There's no question that this is a very, very difficult policy decision, without a doubt. When the bill came to my committee, I didn't think the bill was really cooked enough. And I worked with the author and worked with the teachers, the nurses, the classified staffs who had concerns about the bill. And we were able to make 9 amendments in the bill to help with protections around some of their concerns at the time. And the author finally agreed to adopt those 9 amendments to the bill. I wish today that the bill included some appropriations, because I think at this particular point in time, we should be investing something to make sure that the programs that individual schools create are ones that are of the best practice. And I'm sorry that that's not part of this bill as we stand before, because that got eliminated in the Appropriations Committee. I want so much to stand with teachers
and classified employees and nurses, and I will stand with them and fight until my dying day that we need to invest more in our educational systems, and we need to invest to ensure that we have the very best nurses and the very best classified staff and the very best teachers in our classrooms. And that's what our children deserve. But at the end of the day, I think that this bill, while it's not perfect, this bill is about saving the life of a child, or it is about saving permanent brain damage to a child. And this particular drug was designed and approved by the FDA to be administered by the non-professional, to be administered by adults, by parents who are not trained professionals. Because at the end of the day, when a seizure occurs, it occurs at a time where no one expects it, and a parent or an adult or even a grown child, a brother or sister, who would know how to administer this because it's going to save the life of the child. And so when it all is said and done, in this moment in time, and again, this program is completely voluntary, as it's already been stated, in this moment, for that child, if it's just one child, that we can help and support now because someone at a school campus, an adult, has agreed to be helpful. I think that we need to support those who are willing to save a child's life, and I would encourage and I vote.
Mr. Eng.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I, first of all, want to tell you how humbled I am by this discussion. I don't have the battlefield experience as my colleague, the incredible advocate for veterans and others to my left. I don't have the exact hospital and daily medical experience that our two physician members have. And I don't have the hands-on experience that many of you have with your family. But I will tell you what I do have. I worked full-time, 6 days a week, many times, running an emergency room as a non-medically, professionally trained personnel. I saw individuals go into cardiac arrest in front of me. I saw people bleeding as they were taken from the ambulance and placed on the gurney, literally bleeding to death because they couldn't stop the bleeding when the carotid artery was severed, even in the ambulance. I have seen people sitting upright, reading a newspaper at 9 o'clock, and at 9:10 go into full cardiac arrest with no symptoms whatsoever. I've had to talk to grieving mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and aunts and uncles and grandparents and grandchildren about why. And let me tell you that as much as I wanted to help each and every one of those individuals, I could not. And the reason I could not was not because of the lack of training, because I definitely could sign up for certification. But the reason that I was not allowed to do that, in addition to medical liability, was that unless you consistently see the individuals that have the symptoms that are associated with the treatment that you think is required, is indicated as opposed to contraindicated, training will not help. Unfortunately, the school personnel, the administrators, and the parents on a daily basis are going to see symptoms that, if you get to the root of it, could be an indication of depression. Someone writhing on the floor could be having a psychotic attack. They could be having a diabetic attack. They could be having a situation of not having eaten for several days and be going into low blood sugar emergency. They could be the victim of a bee sting, of a food allergy. And all the training in the world, unless you as a physician or a nurse sees these symptoms every day to have a context that it is A and not B, C, or D, it is going to be very, very difficult to do that. No, but I'm not opposed to this bill for that reason. I have concerns about this bill for a far greater reason, a reason that did not dawn on me until, as a senior class member, rapidly I'm being pushed out the door by the incoming crop of people that are far better than I ever will be. It has dawned on me that every time we have issues that start to parallel each other, that the patchwork quilt doesn't work. We saw that with the green chemistry issue. Should we ban cancer-causing chemicals of this stripe or that stripe? And I sat on that committee.
30 seconds.
And so, members, I think there's a far better way. We need to have hearings. We need to possibly have a select commission. And we need to look at all of the possible indications that will be faced by school administrators and parents and develop a holistic approach, a non-patchwork quilt that will stand the test of time and that basically will be in the long-term best interests of our children. And that's why I, unfortunately, will have to vote no.
Seeing and hearing no further questions or debate, Mr. Cedillo, you may close.
Madam Chair and members, I thank you. I think there's little to add. It's been a very robust, thoughtful, considerate conversation. Very little to add. I will note that, just for the facts, that people who do deal with this, doctors, in fact, do support this. The California Medical Association has taken a position on this. In fact, even more specifically, also the American Academy of Pediatrics have also taken a position in favor of this bill. I agree, that we should take this moment that I believe we will have a consensus on, that we should place children first, and that as we grapple with competing values, that we are choosing the prospects of caring for children as the highest value of the day. But that in doing so, that we should also, and I will also, reaffirm my commitment as a former organizer of nurses, as a former negotiator of nurse contracts, reaffirm my commitment to make sure that we do have nurses in schools. We should. And more than one for every 2,200, which currently exists. That we should also have doctors, we should also have music teachers, and we should also have coaches and after-school sports programs. There's so much more that we should do for the educational environment. And so that in going forward with this and making our commitment, evolving our consensus, choosing children first, that we should reaffirm that by also trying to create the type of educational environment for those of us who did grow up in California and remember the school nurse and the after-school program and the teacher and the school aide and the safe and secure environment, that we should reaffirm those commitments and those values and not place this as an alternative. We would like to make this a perfect bill, and we would like to aspire to create the perfect situation, but this is a good bill. This is a bill for the children of the state of California, and I believe it merits our support. I ask for an aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll. Tally the votes. Ayes 47, no 16. Measure passes. File item 167, pass and retain. File item 168, SB 216. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 216 by Senator Yee and others, an act relating to public utilities.
Mr. Ramiano.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. On September 9, 2010, a gas explosion resulting in a large fire occurred in the city of San Bruno due to a ruptured natural gas line. The San Bruno disaster was declared as a state of emergency. The pipeline was only equipped with manual shutoff valves, and without a technician in the vicinity, the inferno continued for hours, resulting in 8 fatalities, 38 destroyed homes, and more damages in varying degrees. The estimated damages to homes and vehicles was over $55 million and did not include public infrastructure and recovery costs for the event, which has already exceeded $15 million. Federal law currently only requires manual shutoff valves throughout the nation's pipeline system. SB 216 would direct the California Public Utilities Commission to require installation of automatic or remotely controlled valves on all pipelines that cross an active seismic earthquake fault or are located within a high consequence area. The same standard is currently in federal regulation, but only for manual shutoff valves. If SB 216 had been in place last year, the devastation in San Bruno would have been limited and lives could be saved. I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I stand in strong support for SB 216. The National Transportation Safety Board is actually meeting today to discuss the year-long investigation of what the causes were for the devastating explosion in San Bruno. During their hearing, the NTSB stated that safety valves can help protect critical infrastructure in the event of a pipeline explosion, and it actually can save lives. In San Bruno, the gas was not shut off for 90 minutes. If an appropriate valve had been in place, the gas could have been cut off in 15 minutes, which would have saved lives, possibly, but more importantly, it would have saved the devastation of a community. Unfortunately, these issues are not new. The utility, PG&E, missed 2 prior opportunities to address shortcomings in its pipeline system, including the installation of remote or automatic shutoff valves after similar systemic problems emerged following accidents in the company's pipelines in 1981 in San Francisco and 2008 in Rancho Cordova. For these reasons, I ask for your support of this bill.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 72, no 0. Measure passes. File items 169 through 180 pass and retain. File item 181, SB 482. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 482 by Senator Kehoe, an act relating to public health.
Ms. Brownlee, passed temporarily. File item 182, passed temporarily. File items 183 through 192, pass and retain. We're going to go back to file item 89. I'm sorry, Ms. Brownlee is here. I apologize. So let's go back to file item 181, SB 482. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 482 by Senator Kehoe, an act relating to public health.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For the past 14 years, California has had a model beach monitoring program. This program has protected thousands of California beachgoers and tourists from sickness. Beaches are closed by public health officers when high levels of bacterial contamination are present. Since 2008, the State Water Board has been keeping the state's share of funding for this important health program alive temporarily with bond funds, but the money runs out at the end of this year. SB 482 would provide the Water Board with the tools it needs to keep the program going. Beginning January 1 in 2012, the bill transfers the monitoring responsibilities, which the Water Board has already been doing, from the Department of Public Health to the Water Board. With the agreement of the Department of Public Health and the Water Board, the Department of Public Health will retain the authority over setting public health standards for beaches. By giving the Water Board monitoring responsibilities in statute, it gives it authority to secure sustainable funding for the program. SB 482 will help ensure the continuation of this important public health program, and it will help keep millions of beachgoers in California safe and healthy. The bill is sponsored by the California Association of Environmental Health Administrators, and it's supported by the Sierra Club, NRDC, California Coastkeeper Alliance, Heal the Bay, and a number of other coastal communities and counties. There is no opposition. I ask for your aye vote.
Ms. Harkey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, there is opposition to this bill, and it will incur major state costs to fund this, which I could see coming from penalties and further regulation of our existing industries. The Regional Water Quality Boards do have a lot of authority, and I'm not saying that some of this is not needed, but I think the way this is being handled or appropriated to another unelected board, an appointed board, and not dealt with here at the legislative level is probably a wrong thing to do at this time. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Ms. Brownlee, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very important bill to the health and safety of Californians, particularly those who love to go to the beach, and for all the tourists that come to our coastal areas. This is not going to cost the state any additional funding. It's just virtually codifying current practice into law. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 50, noes 23. Measure passes. We're going to go to file item 89. File item 89, SB 488. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 488 by Senator Correa, an act relating to the Political Reform Act of 1974.
Mr. Hall.
Yes, thank you. Madam Speaker and members, SB 48 by Senator Correa will require slate mail organizations to obtain prior consent before using a logo or other emblem that is identical or substantially similar to the one used by a government agency or other organizations that represent a public safety group. Members, slate mailers can claim to represent just about any group or cause under the sun. SB 488 is an attempt to shed some light on the slate mailers that claim to represent law enforcement, firefighting, and public safety personnel when they act, when they in fact may not. Unauthorized use of governmental logos and slate mailers can mislead the public as they attempt to distinguish between legitimate public safety communications and political advertisements. The bill is supported by Common Cause and numerous law enforcement and firefighter organizations. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Jeffries.
Members, I rise in support of this bill. The public, the voting public, puts a lot of faith and trust in their firefighters and their police officers. And when the slate mailers come out and they imply that support for a particular cause or candidate, it should actually reflect the opinions of firefighters or police officers. I actually received a slate mail piece last year that had the logo of a state firefighting organization, a government logo, on the slate mailer. Clearly a questionable use of the logo for such a purpose. And so in this case, while this bill does have a few things in it that I'm not really thrilled about, for the protection of the voting public and the members who make up our public safety services, we do need to have some protections in place on the abuse or misuse of logos that imply support that may or may not be there. I would encourage an aye vote.
Mr. Lara.
Madam Speaker, members, I also rise in support of this important measure. For those of you guys that know, the Southeast LA County, we've had quite a checkered past with elections, and the use of official seals has been an ongoing problem in our district. And so I stand in support of this important legislation that is greatly needed. Thank you.
Mr. Norby.
I rise in opposition to this, Madam Chair. I respect the author and the sponsor's attempt to make campaigns cleaner and to make hit pieces more honest. But I think they're on a fool's errand. And I think if we were to regulate campaign speech, to regulate hit pieces, regulate negative campaigns, regulate smear campaigns, all the things that our opponents, of course, do to us, that we're really on a slippery, maybe slimy slope. I'll take the First Amendment as my protection, and I don't think we really need more than that. Now, everything that the sponsor said is true. Hit pieces are deceptive. They do create logos out of nothing that look official. But I don't think the public places a lot of faith and trust in them. I think they're a lot smarter than we think. After all, we all won our elections, right? So these hit pieces, these slimy, dirty campaigns all failed because we're here. So who are we really trying to regulate? I respect the intent of the author. I know there have been abuses, but sometimes abuses are inevitable in a free society, and to try to regulate speech is a slippery slope I don't want to go down. I ask for a no vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Hall, you may close.
Yes, I respectfully ask for your aye vote, and to respond to one of the members' response. The reason why some members are here are because the negative, slimy mail pieces, in fact, did work. Having said that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 59, noes 12. Measure passes. Okay, members, we are going to stand in recess and go to Democratic and Republican caucus. Democratic caucus in the members' lounge, Republican caucus in the Rules Committee room. Members are not free to leave.